Polygamy is on the rise, but Christians have traditionally rejected the idea. But is it possible that we've been wrong this whole time? We're going to go over all the biblical arguments for it in today's episode of the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. My name is Derry.
And my name is Ethan. And guys, make sure to keep following us on Instagram, YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify. We post our long form and sometimes short form, but Derry and I get pretty busy, so we don't. But if you want to suggest episodes to cover, some topics to cover, make sure to message us on Instagram and you can reach us there. And also, we respond to comments. So if you want to challenge any of our views, please do. We just released a video a couple weeks ago about atheism. Generated a lot of angry comments. Had some good conversations in the comments with some people. With that, let's get into the show.
Boom. So first thing I want to talk about before we're going to react to a certain video is why do you think polygamy and like the sort of like good-naturedness towards it, like people liking it again, is on the rise? We can go over a few polls if you want to in a little bit, but people like it again, apparently. What do you think that's from? Like biblical arguments? Is it the rise of Islam in America? Is it the red pill society? Like what is it?
Definitely carnality and the human nature wanting to have its cake and eat it too and not sacrifice is the blanket statement of like why people, mostly men, I've never heard a reason for polygamy from a woman because they don't get to have multiple husbands. That's why it seems like men might want it, is because, I want to have sex with a bunch of women, so let me find a way to justify that. Would be the like bare basics, and they maybe cover it with Islam or red pill. I think as far as how it's rising in Christian circles, which is unfortunate, at least, it's rising in Christian circles. And all over, you're talking about those polls, just so you guys know, it's the acceptance in America has tripled in the last 20 years for it. So it's a pretty big deal. Like it's still like I think a small amount of people, but if it's continuing in its trend, it's going to be something that like we're going to have to deal with in the next 5 to 10 years in a more serious way. So good to get on the front end of it in whatever capacity we can. But yeah, I think the red pill, the red pill is super cringe, and it's all about like have as many babies as possible, like have as much sex as possible with all these. And so, that appeals to our carnal nature, and maybe guys who are Christians who like Andrew Tate type content might want to find a way to have a Christianized version of that. And then they're like, wait, in the Old Testament, people were polygamous, and the Bible never outright says that we can't, so therefore I can. So we'll get into all those topics, but yeah, I think that is why it is on the rise. People's fleshy natures, and then the red pill movement. It's almost like it's a toxic response to like toxic feminism.
Sure.
You had toxic feminism that told men like, everything you do is toxic masculinity, all this stuff. And then you have these other like hyper red pill characters who rise up like, no, being a man's great. You should be like the greatest man you can. Oh, that's true. Then they go even farther, like, and the greatest man you can be means that you have as many babies with as many women as possible and you marry as many women. It's like, whoa.
You should be a barbarian, go back to war.
Yeah.
Literally.
It's crazy. So
it's crazy.
It's one subject in a bigger conversation of like, I don't know, biblical masculinity maybe.
Sure. I think another thing that led to at least the environment that a liking, again, could kind of come back to polygamy is just like the lines being blurred between sexuality and people doing whatever they want, like the sacredness of it kind of going away, of the family institution, marriage in general, but like sex and sexuality especially. As soon as that's kind of gone, now you have room for all of even these more like conservative like red pill movements to kind of come in and be like, this is the example of sexuality you should follow. And since people don't have a baseline to go off of culturally or even religiously, if they're not religious, they'll just kind of fall for whatever. And so you get a certain amount of the population that isn't for religious reasons, like the fundamentalist Mormons or something that are already polygamous falling for this. It's crazy. And I guess if you don't have a political reason or a moral reason not to think it's okay, then you could think whatever you want is okay. And that's just what the non-God-believing community can do, because you're not subject to any kind of objective standard, which I guess makes sense. But talking about this in a broader context, some statistics that I looked up, around, it's estimated because we don't know, but around 50,000 to 100,000 people in the U.S. practice polygamy, and it's mostly associated with
Mormons,
fundamentalist Mormons.
Oh, I was right.
It's mostly Mormons and Muslims.
Oh, that makes sense. I was making a joke.
So it's mostly. You're 100% correct. Yeah, it's mostly those people.
Dang.
Not like normal Mormons, but the fundamentalist.
Yeah, we'll be fair
ones.
to the middle ground Mormons. We know you guys don't do it. We know you used to. You pulled away. We see you.
Yeah. We get it. You changed your doctrine. Now you're cool again. Got it. What's funny though is that it's still illegal. Like it's illegal in every state. I'm pretty sure it's illegal in the United States to be polygamous.
I thought this was the land of the free. What is happening?
That's not very free.
So much for free.
We should repeal that. Anyways, it's definitely illegal. Globally, there's about like 2% of the population that's polygamous. And to give a quick like definition, there's two different things, at least in the Christian circles that I've seen people addressing. Most people I have seen within like the Christian circles don't necessarily talk about polygamy, because technically polygamy can be in either direction of the genders, like women having a lot of husbands or husbands having a lot of wives. But they talk about polygyny, and polygyny is just a man having a lot of wives. So the people that we're going to talk about today are people who are Christians, whatever stream they come from, believe normal Christian doctrine, except they think that because of the patriarchs and other biblical arguments we're going to go over in a second, that polygyny, a man having multiple wives, is an okay thing and how God actually created us to exist. So that's what we're kind of getting into today. But I guess I'll play a video. Though not the way I got exposed to this, but one of the reasons I knew it was becoming a little more popular is that I started seeing a whole bunch of videos on Instagram, on Reels about it, some stuff on TikTok, and then some YouTube creators doing debates about it. I saw a debate on some red pill community that I didn't follow, but it just kind of came up on my feed.
What is your algorithm?
Like people... There's so much different stuff.
It's like Catholic, Orthodox, and polygamy.
Literally.
With weightlifting.
And it'll be like Destiny, like a liberal guy. And then the next video, because he interacts a lot with the red pill community and does debates with them and stuff. And then the next video will be a video on polygamy between a Christian and a non-Christian or something. So it's wild. Anyway. So I'm going to play a quick video, and this is one of the videos that I saw on Instagram. I actually had a dialogue with this guy on Instagram, and he said he was kind of interested on coming on the podcast and talking about it, but he was kind of hesitant. He has a book out on it. He's Christian and believes that you can be polygamous. A good topic at the end to talk about, Ethan, would be, because obviously we believe polygamy is wrong, can you be a Christian and be polygamous today? That would be an interesting thing to talk about. But this is the video. All of his videos he makes, he puts like AI women like as the debaters or the convincers, the main characters of the videos. And it's honestly hard to tell that they're not real. Like I didn't know at the beginning. And then you kind of start to look at the mouth and like the eyes and you're like, oh, something's wrong here.
And the voice.
Anyways.
The voice just is like something weird about the voice.
True. So I'll play this video and we'll get into it.
God saw men sleeping with men. He said, stop. God saw men sleeping with family members. He said, stop. God saw men sleeping with animals. He said, stop. God saw men sleeping with other men's wives. He said, stop. God saw men taking multiple wives for themselves. And he said, here are the rules. The rules in Leviticus 18 provide a thorough look into what constitutes sexual immorality. So whenever sexual immorality is mentioned later in the Bible, this is the main passage that defines what that is. You know what isn't mentioned as immoral? A man having multiple wives. You'd think if there were any place to spell it out plainly, this would be it, right? But it's not. Why do you think that is?
There we go. So we're done with the podcast. It's fine to do. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. My first thoughts immediately are like, okay, when else in our lives do New Covenant Christians refer to Leviticus for how to live our lives? You know, that's the first thing. It's, you know, I know there are Christians who will use Leviticus to say that homosexuality is wrong. And, you know, I would agree homosexuality is wrong. But we also have New Testament reasons to believe that as well. So we can back it up.
Paul talks about it.
Yeah, Paul talks about it. And so that's interesting because I would ask those people like, what other parts of Leviticus are you keeping? Are you, there's so many things that you could say about, are you keeping the dietary laws? Are you shaving your head or your beard? Are you wearing mixed garments? How far do we want to go?
Yeah.
It seems like, I don't know this person that you've interacted with. So I want to be respectful, but it seems like a lot of the polygamous teaching that I've seen in the research for this kind of like cherry pick and have like these one-off reasons that contradict each other almost for believing in this. But yeah, what do you think about that Leviticus, I think they said 18 section, because it is interesting that it does have restrictions, but then rules, it seems. And we could go through Leviticus 18 if we want, but I don't know if right now is the time to do a verse by verse. What'd you say?
I said no one would watch the podcast if we did that.
I just read Leviticus, actually. My wife and I are going through the chronological Bible in a year. So we're in Deuteronomies right now. So about Deuteronomy the other. So about a couple weeks ago we finished up Leviticus.
Sure. No matter what, they're arguments from silence, right? Like the arguments we're going to make are going to be partially arguments from silence, and the arguments that they make are arguments from silence, right? Because the Bible doesn't necessarily ever come out and say polygamy is bad in that sense, or polygamy is good. And so we got to make up other arguments from Scripture, which these people do as well, and try to like back up our position, right? Mm-hmm. One thing that I think is interesting in this argument from silence from the Leviticus verses is, well, what if it says don't murder, but it doesn't say I can't hold someone hostage in my basement? Like, why can't I do that? Like, the Bible doesn't say it's wrong.
That's so true. It doesn't say I can't torture you.
You know what I mean? Yeah. A torture might be a little too far because it'd be harming somebody, but I could lock them in my basement.
It doesn't say I can't.
Yeah. Like, why couldn't I do that? Because the Bible is silent on it, technically. So I don't think arguments from silence biblically are very good. Mm-hmm. We obviously have to go through more in-depth, like, biblical principles, which I think the creator of this video and other people would also agree. Like, we got to make more outside arguments for and against to decide, like, what we think about it. So is there a place that you want to start, Ethan, or should I start us off with the arguments for and against here?
Yeah, you go ahead and start it off. I have a couple verse references and biblical examples that like kind of show the patterns of polygamy almost, and at least in the Old Testament. But yeah, you can go ahead and I'll just jump in at random times.
Okay, cool. So the first argument I hear most Christian polygamists talk about is that a lot of the patriarchs had multiple wives. And so because the Bible's silent on it, and most of the fathers of our faith had multiple wives, then why in the world would we not be able to have multiple wives? What do you think about that?
Yeah, they did have multiple wives. I would say that there's this idea, and I don't know how I feel about it because I haven't looked into it. I've heard some people say like, oh, this is a bad idea, so I have to verify it. But we talked about this a bit, this idea of progressive morality. I think this would be a time where it's an okay use of progressive morality, where it's like, yeah, God brought them out of Egypt. They were every culture around that area, had practiced polygamy, and so Yahweh, rather than saying completely outright no, was patient with the people, but his ultimate goal was to get humanity as a whole to monogamous relationships, and he knew it would take a process to do that. Kind of like if you ever have been addicted to something, you can't just usually cut cold turkey. Not many people can do that. So the God is patient with us, and there's a process where God helps us move from addiction to freedom, and it's slowly removing it over time and ultimately arriving at polygamy. And the reason I think I can be confident saying that polygamy is the way God intended it and where he was moving it to us, or moving humanity, is because polygamy is not where God's moving it, and God is moving us to monogamy.
You said it was.
Sorry. Is because God created Adam and Eve, right? He created a monogamous relationship. That was from the beginning.
Sure.
And you don't see Adam take any other wives. So,
right. If we're arguing from, which this would be a person who doesn't affirm polygamy, if we want to argue from creation intent, Adam and Eve, obviously, why didn't God create a whole bunch of women for Adam to be with, right? Especially from the first gift God gives Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, right? It's a command and a gift in the Hebrew. if that's the gift that he's giving them, that's like half of their job is to repopulate or to populate the earth. Why wouldn't, if it's God's intent to do that, why wouldn't he give them more than one woman? Like if that's God's original intent. Another thing you can look at is when God recreates the world in the second like creation kind of story with Noah. When he wipes out the world and you just have Noah repopulating it, you only have 8 people that are saved. You have Noah, his 3 sons, and then their 4 wives. You don't have their 2 wives or their 3 wives. There's just one. So just arguing from a creation intent at the very beginning, I think it's a pretty strong argument. But I think the normal Christian retort to, look, these patriarchs had multiple wives, I would say this usually. One, starting off at the very beginning, no, they didn't, right? So the first one, like Adam, obviously didn't. And as you see sin progressively get more extreme, you start to see people take more than one wife.
That's a good
the first person
observation.
Yeah. The first person to ever be a polygamist was a terrible person, Lamech. And like the only things that is said about him is that he was a murderer and he boasted about being a murderer and he took more than one wife. And it's the whole passage is negative. Everything he did was negative, and he was cursed more than Cain for his actions. And so clearly the first polygamous person in the Bible is viewed in a very negative light, and all of his actions are viewed in a negative light. So I think it's a pretty bad starting point to say, well, this is God's intent when the first person described to be doing this action in the Bible is viewed very negatively for it. The second being Abraham, also every action reaction to him being polygamous is bad, right? He's polygamous because he doesn't have faith in God's promises. So because his wife's like, you could take another wife, that's one of my concubines. He doesn't have faith in waiting and believing that God is going to do what he said he's going to do. And he has a lot of terrible consequences because of it. And so none of that story is positive. And he in the end, like he doesn't end up with having those 2 wives, right?
And what's interesting is every time it's talked about like Hagar and Sarah or Sarai in Genesis, God only refers to Sarah as the wife and Hagar as a servant. It never says your wife Hagar.
There you go. That's interesting. Didn't know that. The last thing that I think is the most popular argument that most Christians usually go to is that my mind went blank.
The passage that polygamists will go to?
No, Christians.
Oh.
Okay, yeah.
There's a Corinthians
it's usually
verse.
that. Well, I think like just a narrative argument is usually that these things are descriptive, not prescriptive, right?
Yep.
So in the Old Testament, most of the times that these forefathers are being described as being polygamous, God's not affirming their actions. He's just describing what they was happening with them. Like Ethan said, this is a culture that affirms polygamy, right? Other cultures outside of Israel or outside of the Jews are polygamous, and so it's just a normal part of their lives. Now all of a sudden they have the law and all these things, and this is just a part of it. God's trying to get them to a place where they're out of it, just like God was leading them out of slavery. Like there's still laws around slavery, which is a problem for some people, but you see that God wants to lead us to a place where we're at today where we're not polygamous and we don't have slaves. Like if you read the Bible carefully, you'll see his design and his intent from Genesis in there, 1 man, 1 woman, and neither of them are slaves. And as you see the people of God continue to get out of slavery through Exodus, like it's clear that that's God's intent, that we shouldn't have slaves. We've done other episodes on that, but it's clear that the morality is progressing, and these instances that are being described are descriptive and not prescriptive. We're not supposed to live that way. It's just how they were living then. And the reason that there's silence on it, right, because that will be the person's retort, well, if it's just descriptive, then that means that I could do it too, because it's not prescriptive. I would say out of the other verses in the Bible, like we've talked about already, you can kind of tell that it's not God's ultimate intent for people to be polygamous. He just allowed it in the moment.
Yeah, and if anyone was trying to get away with it, like, oh yeah, God doesn't say not to, you got to go to the New Testament as well as like New Covenant Christians, right? Which is just a Christian. I don't know how I have to clarify the New Covenant, but like the Old Testament's important. I'm not saying it's not important. We need the Old Testament in order to understand the New Testament. But, you know, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:2, let each man have his own wife and each wife have her own man. So right there, that's enough where he's using singular words to inform us that the New Testament perspective is calling for monogamy, right? And you also, I think Derry touched on this a little bit too. Every time you see polygamy in the Bible, at least specifically Genesis, it never ends well. Polygamy is always associated with bad and bad things happening, right? So if you're also going to take the idea like, well, the patriarchs did it, so we should too, then you should go become a sheep herder or a farmer or a wanderer. Like it's just you just can't take these arguments to their actual extreme and actually believe that they hold up, because that would mean all of us who aren't farmers would then go become farmers, and not even actually farmers, like sheep herders specifically. So
right, yeah. The only place in the Bible where polygamy is commanded by God and spoken about in any kind of positive way is a place in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, where God commands a guy, the Levirate marriage is like what it's referred to as. He basically says like, hey, like your brother's wife has, your brother has died. Take his wife, I can't speak, and marry her, basically. So become polygamous. What do you think? Like, why is that not a good argument for polygamy, Ethan?
Because that has a lot to do with just Israel at the time of this in this society, right? God gave land allotments to tribes specific to families. And if someone didn't have an heir to give the family to, there's a question of who does the land go to, right? And God's like, the land's going to stay in the family. So the husband or the brother who's commanded to marry his sister-in-law and raise up children, right, is supposed to have kids with her. So then her kids will take over their father's land. And so it's about like, maybe their posterity is the correct word, or the family's financial security, and about taking care of the family, and not about just mere pleasure, right? It's also protection for the female in this society, because if women didn't have a patriarch, then they didn't have a lot of hope for anything, right? That having a husband was their, or being under their father's house or their husband's house was their security. It was their income. A lot of women didn't have rights like they do in today's society. They had far more than they did in other pagan cultures. So for a lot of people who think the Bible is misogynistic, you just have to compare the Torah with other cultures in the surrounding areas and realize the Bible is actually very liberating for women for the culture that it was given to, right? But nowadays, right, women don't need a patriarch like that. Women can get jobs. Women can make an income. They can have careers. They can be incredibly successful. So there's less societal argument for that. And also, that was a theocracy set up by God for a time. We're no longer in a theocracy set up by God.
Very good. Yeah. What about this argument from Christians? I hear this sometimes, and I kind of disagree with it. But some Christians will say, well, God just allowed them to be polygamous because he wanted the earth to be populated with like the Jews. Like it was a way for him to populate the earth quickly, and so he allowed the patriarchs to have more than one wife. But we shouldn't do it now because the earth's already populated.
I've never heard that rebuttal, but I would say, yeah, one, the earth is populated, so we don't need it, even if that's true. And also, Adam was the one.
This is an argument from Christians,
right?
Like not a.
Yeah. So, but Adam was given the command to be fruitful and multiply, and he had one wife, so that should be enough. And also, I would say, it's not the case that Israel needed it to be populous, right? They were 600,000 people minimum, maybe closer to 1 million. So it's not like they needed any trouble or needed any help, like repopulating.
Very true. And I do like what you said earlier that I didn't respond to at the time. I do like what you said about the lists for Christians and like thinking about the New Testament and how it views marriage. Like in all the lists in Timothy for who can be an elder, a deacon, a pastor, it's always husband of one wife. It's never like husband of multiple wives or anything. Like it's very specific.
Right.
How it talks.
And so some people might hear that and be like, well, that's just for church leadership. The congregation can be, polygamous. But then it's like, well, where do you think the pastors are coming from? The pastors are coming from the congregation. And the pastors are supposed to be an example of how the congregation is supposed to live. They're supposed to be held to a higher standard so the congregation can aim to that, right? So if they are living monogamous, that's a picture of what an approved godly leader is and everyone should want to look like an approved godly leader.
Sure. Okay, here's a question for you then that might bring some nuance to it if a Christian was maybe thinking about this. If monogamy is God's ideal, but he allows polygamy, at least in the Old Testament, right? Is it okay for someone to be polygamous today if God would allow it, and like not outlaw it, but yeah. What do you think about that? Is it a sin?
Yes, it's sin. Yeah, it's sin. And the reason I think it's sin is because in order to get to polygamy, you have to sin. You can't get to polygamy without sinning, because if you're going to say, oh, I can marry another woman that's not that like a second woman, if you're already married, well, what does that require? That requires you to be flirting with another woman that's not your wife, dating another woman that's not your wife, being engaged to a woman that's not your wife. And although there could be people who say like, oh yeah, dating couples shouldn't kiss, like dating couples kiss. And while watching a movie, they might cuddle. And so now this guy's going to have to be kissing another woman. Doesn't have to, but more likely will be kissing and cuddling and holding hands and going on dates with another woman that's not his wife. We would say that's cheating. And so in order to get to this apparently permissible situation by God, he has to break the commands of God. And also that woman then is committing adultery because she's being with another woman's man until she's his woman. It just falls apart pretty quickly. And yeah, no, it's not allowed. You can't do that.
I would agree. I think if you would say you can do it, then that means you could also have slaves, and that wouldn't be a sin. Like if we're talking about progressive morality and God allowing something back in the day and not allowing it today, just because he allowed it then doesn't mean he would allow it now, right? There's an ideal. And why would God want you to go back to not the ideal if there's an ideal set out, right? Like there's a way Israel did it, and there's a way that God's kingdom operates. And God's kingdom operates in a like we've talked about many times, like a here but not fully kind of way. And so we're supposed to operate in the way the kingdom would operate when it's here fully, when Christ returns. And I promise you that that's not in a polygamous kind of way. And so we shouldn't be trying to go back to how things were if things are closer to how God would intend them to be in the garden now.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And another thing too is like, what is marriage for? Right? The picture, what marriage is, yes, for repopulating the earth, and for fulfillment and to, gratify our sexual desires, you could say, sure. But also the biggest reason, the most important thing about marriage is that it's a picture of Christ and the church. And polygamists, I've heard take this and say, exactly, there's tons of churches, so people can have tons of wives. There's one God who the male represents in a marriage, and there's many churches who the wife represents in the marriage. And so therefore, God has many wives because there's many churches. This is, I'm sorry, the stupidest argument the polygamists have made. There's way better arguments that we've already covered a little bit, but it takes very little theological training or biblical understanding to know that capital C church is a placeholder for meaning every Christian everywhere across all time. And so every Christian everywhere across all time represents the church. The church is the bride of Christ. And so it's a monogamous relationship. And so if the spiritual thing that marriage represents is monogamous, then marriage should be monogamous.
Would you say that somebody today could be a Christian and be polygamous, or are you not a Christian if you're openly polygamous today? And you're not coming from another culture.
Okay,
or something.
okay.
Like if you had multiple wives and you're coming from Islam or something like that.
Okay, so that's where I was going to go. I've heard stories from missionaries where they have converted people who were polygamous, and then the guy is like, well, what do I do now? And what he did is he was apparently really rich, so he bought a bunch of land and built houses for all his other wives and their children, and then just lived with his first wife and was like committed to his first wife. And he's like, yeah, I was a polygamist before I became a Christian, and so I have a biblical duty to care for these people now. Like I brought life into the world, it's my responsibility. So I set up all these houses on this property, but this is my one wife that I'm with now, is the first wife. So that was a pretty cool response to it, but I don't think you could be like a polygamous Christian. I think if you are like polygamous first, almost like, like you're polygamous, became a Christian, then you have to repent, right? You have to change your mind. I don't think you can become a Christian. You can be a Christian and after becoming a Christian, become a polygamist. I think that kind of gets tricky. It's hard to say. I don't think Christians will be polygamous, I would say. But they can be confused and thinking that it's kind of like what we talked about with a couple months ago of being affirming. Like, can Christians be affirming? And it's like, well, yes, but the more you walk with Christ, the less you will continue to be affirming.
God's going to walk you out of that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Very interesting.
What do you think?
And that's basically what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7. I can't remember the exact quotation. Maybe I can look it up here. But he basically says when you convert to Christianity, like, stay as you were. I can't remember the exact situation, but I remember him saying that.
He says if you're married, just don't seek to be single, and if you're single, don't seek to be married.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it right now.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, while you're looking at that,
important.
Well, I was gonna say while you're looking for that, I can just describe the passage for the viewer. But yeah, it's just basically like this question of like, oh, I got married, or I'm a Christian. Should I now be single so I can go preach the gospel like you, Paul? And he's like, well, no, like you can't get divorced because you became a Christian to preach the gospel. Like, just stay married. And someone was like, became a Christian when they're single. Like, should I get married? Like, should I worry about that? And he's like, just preach the gospel. Worry about serving God. Like, don't worry about it. Just stay as you are and serve God how you are. And then he's like, if you want to get married, sure. But if not, it's better that you don't. It's Paul's perspective.
Yeah. And then he goes over circumcision and being a slave too. He's like, should we seek to be free? And he's like, the world's ending, basically. Like, preach the gospel as much as you can.
Yeah. And I think Paul's mentality, I heard this somewhere, I had to verify it. But basically it's kind of like, look, if you're a slave, don't seek to be free. But if you can get free, yeah, it's better. Yeah, try to get free if you can.
Yeah.
So we have this idea where, like, yeah, slavery wasn't like, Paul wasn't saying slavery is wrong, you should not be slaves, and slave masters should free their slaves. Because slavery looked different than it did in our context now. It was more like a lot of people were voluntary slaves because they're like their masters, or they're in an economic situation where they needed to be not forcibly taken and abused like slavery in modern times. That is like a reason why Christians are against slavery. But the reason Paul didn't outlaw it specifically is one, because it's different, but he also says like, yeah, if you can get free, do it. So again, we see that progressive morality where it's like, hey, that is the situation, but if you can get free, it's better. So could be the same thing with polygamy where it's like, hey, yeah, you guys have been polygamous, but you should be monogamous.
Right. Yeah, it could be the same. So that's most of what I have, most of the arguments I have for and against polygamy. Is there anything else that you had, Ethan?
I'm just trying to think about this. Some reasons I saw is like this guy, he has Rob Kowalski has like 40,000 subs on YouTube. One of his posts on Instagram has almost 1 million views. And one of his points he makes is like, oh yeah, polygamy is good because it helps men deal with their natural natures, and we don't have to compromise their natural desires. And really the whole, like, when people make arguments for polygamy, like, oh, you can have your natural desires, and that's a good natural desire that you should have, and all that stuff. What that tells me, I'm like, okay, you don't know what it means to die to yourself. Like, some people have natural desires to steal things, or I have a natural desire to want to get drunk when I'm drinking because it makes my body feel good, right? That doesn't mean you're allowed to. There's a real situation where you die to yourself. You pick up your cross and follow Christ. And also self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. So yes, God wants a monogamous relationship. And if you're like, well, I can't have my natural desire, I'm like, you just have no self-control. It's like, and they act like, they made it seem like weak men were the monogamous ones and they didn't have control over their relationships. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, you're submitting to your wife, like your wife leads a relationship. But the thing is, like, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, I think it's 7, he says the wife does not have authority over her own body. Her husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body. The wife does. So Paul does list this mutual submission where, like, yeah, the man doesn't have authority over his own body and the marriage. That's just like each spouse belongs to the spouse. And so there is this aspect where it's like, oh, you're going to say like weak men are the monogamous ones? It's like, I don't know. It's a lot more honorable and noble to be self-controlled and faithful to one woman than finding any excuse you can to have your own sexual gratification, which is really just selfish. That's the end of the day. It's just, you just want to have sex with more women. Like, that's, let's just talk about it, you know? Let's try to don't doctor it up and make it theological and make it awesome and make it like so hyper spiritual and you're a better person, you're following Christ. You just want to have sex with more women. Just say that. And then, you know, then they say like, oh, and then they say monogamy causes people to then fornicate and like sleep around before marriage. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Again, that's just sinful attitudes. It's, what are you talking about? Like, just because people don't want to obey Christ doesn't mean that we change the commands of Christ so people like him more. You know, like, what are you talking about?
I feel like, and this is, both of these arguments are obviously just very, like, our personal opinion. But anybody who's ever fallen in love before wouldn't want to be polygamous. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, if you've ever experienced, like, being in love, like, I've never been in the midst of being in love and been like, you know, make this better. More people.
Yeah.
Like, this never happened to anyone before. It's only like the mindset you said before, in my opinion, of like somebody just wants to have more sex, or like they've fallen out of love with someone and they're bored and they don't actually want to be committed to that person, so they bring in more people.
Saying you've fallen out of love and you're bored, so therefore you're going to do the easy thing and just be with someone else and not do the hard work of like rekindling your own romance. I'm just like, that's weak. How weak do you have to be to just be like, never mind, I'm done. It's like, come on, dude. Like, you're just like, you're not an honorable man if you do that. Like, you're not a godly man. You're not a good man. You're a bad person.
Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of being harsh because I think people who, hopefully people are hearing this, can get convicted. It's like, you got to stop. You know, you are commanded by God to be faithful to one woman, and it's your responsibility, and obviously hers as well, to keep the romance alive. It's a lot of people have this idea like the grass is greener on the other side. It's like, no, it's not. The grass is greener where you water it. Like, you want a romantic relationship, find ways to be romantic. You got to do fun things, find a new hobby. You know, there's things you can do, and I'm not saying it's easy. I can't say like, I'm not like, obviously like, and I've only been married for about 3 years now. But I'm like, I just know I've seen couples be married for decades and have romance. So I'm like, it's possible. People do it. So it's got to be possible, you know?
Yeah. Very true. But clearly, monogamy is God's ideal. And that's what every Christian should strive for. And I don't see any good exceptions for polygamy anywhere in the Bible. I think it's pretty clear. And I think that's why I think most of Christianity has always affirmed that as well. So, yeah. Anything else that you want to say on the topic, Ethan?
Yeah, I would just say whenever it comes to these things where it's like, it seems contradictory to how Christians have done things for thousands of years, I always resort to, okay, is it possible that 2,000 years of church history is right and I'm wrong? Is it like, am I really the one that's like am I really the one that is right and 2,000 years people got it wrong? That can't be the case.
Yeah. Like, and this is the case, if almost all of our church fathers all point back to Genesis, where it says that God created one man and one woman.
I'll be right back.
If they almost all point to that, like, it's pretty clear that you're probably not smarter than all of those people who lived closer to Christ, like closer to the time of Christ. Like, your modern understanding of Scripture, probably not better than theirs. Maybe it's better than some of them. But the fact that almost all of them agreed on this topic is pretty good evidence that probably God's original intent is that there should be one man and one woman, and that's what marriage is, and not a whole bunch of women and one man.
Amen. Oh, my light fell.
Well, guys, thanks so much for listening to the podcast today. Hopefully, if you came into this thinking that polygamy was good, maybe we've changed your mind. If we didn't, we'd love to hear from you.
If you didn't change your mind, you should.
That's
just rewatch it. Check out Mike Wingers. Read the Bible. Go to church.
Look, take it off of double speed. Listen to it again, and then you could DM us.
Yeah. This is something that, like, there's some podcasts will be like, yeah, maybe we're wrong. This one we're not. We're definitely right on this one. You need to change your mind. All right, guys. See you
Yes.
next week.
Adios.